Welcome to the Keeping IT Real podcast. This podcast features honest and transparent conversations about what it takes to manage corporate technology and expenses today. Each episode, listen to true and personal stories from IT professionals who are working hard to make sure their business stays connected and competitive. I'm your host, Jethro Castillo, and let's meet our next guest. Today, I'm joined by Mitch Cullins, a director of IT. Mitch carries with him an excellent combination, a love for technology, a desire to put people first, and an understanding of business fundamentals. He brings this mix to every organization, ensuring business success by matching business needs with technology solutions. Mitch, thanks for being on the podcast.
Jethro, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
So obviously I introduced you a little bit, but I can never do the person justice. So why don't you start by kind of introducing yourself the way you like to introduce yourself?
Okay, great. I will say I am a huge tech enthusiast. Very much amateur hacker. Had a lot of fun from the time I was very young, playing with anything technological. Starting with the earliest computers to all of my toys and taking them apart and stuff. I think more recently, my interests lie a little bit more in the people around me. So as my career has kind of moved from hands-on working in IT and tech, I've kind of progressed to spending time building people and careers and helping people around me while surrounded by tech. So it's a great mix now where I get to do a little of both. I get to help people kind of move along and develop, but also get to play with all the new technology, and it's a great mix.
Yeah. You, as a tech enthusiast, technology continues to move and evolve, and now it feels like it's lightning speed, right? What are you kind of most excited about when it comes to tech now, and also on the flip, what kind of gives you pause? What are you most concerned about as well?
It's funny. I almost don't want to say this because it's such a buzzword, but it is AI, right? Being a practitioner, I remember when everything was cloud, you're like, I don't want to see how cloud works. So I know some executives saw that word in a magazine on their plane and now they're asked that, but it truly is AI, right? We're starting to see where it's not just like a cool parlor trick, but where you can say, hey, especially one thing that I really like is when you can create an artifact. So if I can say like, hey, create something for me that is a template for this form I'm going to do, and it comes out and it's already kind of in the format of the form, and I just have to tweak it and stuff. So really the thing that interests me the most is AI and its practical applications. For just making my daily life easier, giving me a template of a letter. I'm always going to proofread that. I wouldn't let a human assistant write a letter that I wouldn't proofread to make sure it came out in my voice. I'm certainly not going to let an automated one do it. But the amount of time saving and ease that AI can use, and also for things that just, are routines that humans don't want to do or aren't good at, AI, photo inspection, things like that. Looking at parts going down an assembly line or something, looking for defects, it's beyond what humans can do. But, the flip side of that is, like something I'm going through right now, at work, we're starting to evaluate, what tools could we use, what might we turn on that would enable our work and make things easier for us. And the first thing you find when you start looking at, the ones that are like deeply ingrained with your work, Copilot, things like that is, well, it's hard sometimes for human to stumble across a bunch of things that they shouldn't see, but it's just there by default when you look at AI, right? So if you have an environment that wasn't built securely, where data wasn't tagged properly, things like that, the ability to really get yourself into trouble, do things wrong, to expose data, whether it's internally or externally. But honestly, right now, I'm worried about just internal exposure. It's crazy. So that's the thing that kind of terrifies me this week.
Just this week specifically?
Yeah. You know what? It's a different thing every week, but I was already very concerned enough that I went to a security seminar last week that was a big part of the focus. And when you see experts talking about it, it just ramps it up that much more because you see the ease in which somebody who's spent a little time thinking about it can really expose the weaknesses of tools like that.
Yeah, it's definitely and this is every technology, right? It comes with it takes a while to mature and develop. Like even the smartphone, right? Or the iPhone specifically, it was great, but it took time to develop its maturity to where it is now because of all of those concerns, right? And AI has a much larger concern for sure because of its nature. But yeah, I think I do have the same concerns of data integrity too. Like Like, sure, we keep certain data in and we keep certain data out, but how do we ensure that the data that is gleaned from it, the information that is gleaned from it, is actually accurate or not biased or anything like that? And so there's a lot. We already deal with information issues like that in real life without AI as humans. Are we getting the right data? Is the data not biased? And how do we ensure that? So I'm with you there. What are you kind of up to now? What does your day-to-day look like for your work?
Growing up where you own all the infrastructure, I always gravitated towards the infrastructure side of things. Companies that were big enough, I tended to be on the project delivery side of things, a lot run operations as well. So it was a lot of, building data centers, setting up new locations, deploying networks, setting up servers, print servers, and all these things that are not really so necessary anymore. So now I'm doing two things. I started a job recently, so I'm at a pretty new place. So I won't talk too much about them just because it's kind of still we're some sort of honeycomb grade.
Yeah.
But I'm running a new company called Art of Problem Solving. Fantastic company. I'm surrounded by the smartest people. It's crazy. Every time I turn around, first of all, it's very math and science oriented. And I'm surrounded by people that are high level mathematicians, a lot of PhDs in just random topics, but just smart people, that fit the model of what we're looking for. So it's an interesting environment to be talking to people that I have to be on my game just to have a good conversation with them. But as far as the tech landscape, it's so minimal nowadays. Everything is in the cloud. They're a great example. When they started, they didn't have an IT department. They didn't really need it because they had all engineers who had computers who could reach the applications they needed, right? And eventually you need an IT department in that because you start having to meet, regulations and things like that and look at security and such from a universal scope. But you didn't in the very, formative years. You could get started. And as long as you have great engineers, all that stuff's built in. So it makes for an interesting environment nowadays where there's not all that building servers and things, and it's more around how do we meet, security policies, and how do we, right now, AI, how do I build a policy around, let's get the most benefit for the company, right? Let's meet company objectives using AI without risking our data. So it's much more around governance of the use of technology, right? And, you mentioned iPhone. That's the greatest example ever, I think, of how consumers brought their demand in and then companies had to support it, right? It wasn't built as a corporate device. It was forced upon corporations to use because it was such a demand. And that's the way a lot of IT is now. So my role now is so much more, finding ways to address business problems and less about, just nuts and bolts, literally nuts and bolts of IT. And, I have a second thing going. I'm not here as an advertisement, so I will show up for like 1 second, but, I invented something while I was in IT. I just happened to work at a real big facility where we had a couple of buildings, and, each week we would need to, patch in the ports at each cubicle, right? All wired networks and basic security practices. You're not going to have a live port in a cube. And we needed a way to label them. Well, it turned out that patch panels are, in almost every building I've ever worked at, patch panels are not well labeled, right? If they were labeled when they were installed, maybe they were labeled at that point, but then you rebuilt cubicles, bigger, smaller, whatever. They don't match anything. So, when we went to patch them in, we never knew which one to patch. So we would have to walk back and forth all day long with a totem probe just to identify which ones, waste a ton of hours. So I kept trying to buy something and, it didn't exist. So I drew it up and got two patents for it. And it is the simplest thing. And the number one comment I get from people is, are you sure that didn't already exist? I'm like, I know.
Yeah.
The guy that was walking back and forth doing this for like 4 hours every Friday was a CCIE. And this is back when I worked at a global company. So there's always something going on somewhere in some country somewhere that he could have been doing something valuable instead of just labeling. So anyway, that's it. You just plug it in and it has a tag. So the point is, the other thing I'm doing these days is I have my own company called Trump Tie that sells these. I don't advertise it, so it's not well known, but anyway, that's a trunk tie. So by day, I'm an IT director and by night I make and sell trunk ties.
Well, I've actually, my brother actually works for the USPTO for physics things. And so I actually got to ask him a lot of questions about that process. And
And we ended up getting to the conclusion of like the majority of patents fail because it's hard to come up with something so new because it feels like everything has been invented. So
especially something dumb. Right? If you're like a really smart inventor, maybe, but this is dumb. I can't believe someone else didn't do that.
So that's why I was always like, oh, then I can't invent anything because it's probably been thought up or it's in the patent sort of thing and I just don't get the in. And so the fact that this was available and no one came up with this is awesome, right? To get the patent approved, I think is really cool. So I know you said you didn't want to sell, but I think that's just not even an advertising or a sale in general. It's just more like that's kind of a really cool thing to be able to say, I got a patent on something.
It's going pretty well. That's funny. That's the thing. I wasn't interested in starting a company at all. I wanted to buy those so that like I wasn't wasting all those hours. And then I just could never find it. So eventually I got the patent. And then I really was just thinking, this is going to be so cool on my resume. And then I talked to some people that are in that field, like telecom and data cabling. They were like, this is awesome. Let me connect you to some of the manufacturers. And they all took a look at it. They were like, this is cool. Like we all sell wire. We all sell the same, like every single product. This is a differentiator. This is cool. What are your sales? And I was like, sales. And it's just a patent.
I'm just an inventor.
I'm a patent. And they're like, well, let us know what your sales are and then we'll know how to price it. So I learned how to manufacture it. Later, I learned things like the harmonized tariff system, because every once in a while I get an order from another country and you have to figure out all the customs paperwork. So it's been a really interesting learning experience for sure.
No, that's awesome. I'm happy that you talked about that on this episode. That's a really cool thing for sure.
Thanks. And it's a little off topic, but as far as what am I doing these days, it's a little of that and a lot of being an IT director.
Yeah, and I want to dive into that a little bit. What do you see IT directors, or even specifically in your role, like the biggest challenges that people are facing right now? And you can be as simple as saying, oh, always money, time, resources. But what goes into that? You know what I mean? What are the biggest challenges that IT directors face now? And what are you doing with it?
Yeah. There's one really consistent one, and it does kind of tie to the money, time, et cetera. But there is a solution, and that's why it's frustrating and we're talking about. Because I've, in the last, 10 years or so, I've gone through a couple of positions at different companies, right, for various reasons, layoffs, things like that. Changed a few times. And the one thing that seems to be consistent is there's not a consistent way, to bring in that demand. There's not a well thought out demand management program in most places, right? To kind of figure out what do people need? What do we have the capability to deliver? And then somehow prioritize. It always seems to be like, who's the squeakiest wheel, or which vice president has the most use. It's nothing that really has any tie to business objectives. And I have been somewhere that did it incredibly well, and a couple of places that did it sort of well, but mostly places that just didn't know how to address it. It seems pretty straightforward. And that's, at the highest level, to figure out what your strategic drivers are. I'll use the place that did it really well for an example. We had a few, it's been a few years, so I may not remember them all, but it was the place where we had schools, right? So our number one thing always, every year, was drive student success. So that meant like student retention, not having people drop out. Like, how do we support them and make sure that they're successful and that they can get through their program? And then other years we would change one of the drivers, and it might be something like, we're going to really try to get more students, or drive sales. And later, another year, it might be, let's cut costs and try to improve profitability. But then there were a couple sort of intangibles that were around successes in our field, which was school. So it was about students being successful. So once everybody knows that, then when you get a project that says, we want to redesign the website, you're like, well, which of these things does that affect? Does that get us more customers? Does that help a student not drop out of school? Right. And somebody else has a project that's like, we want to have, something that does global text messages whenever there's a change in a class schedule. Okay, that's going to help some students, right? So it really helps us prioritize things. And I know that's the application of that's going to be different almost anywhere, but so many places don't have anything. And then it's just arguments, right? It's you get in a room and the loudest VP gets their project done. And maybe it's a vanity thing. Maybe it's, who knows, redecorating the office or something. Maybe that needs to be done, but it probably doesn't have any real direct impact on business outcomes.
I think this is a really, the reason why I asked and you answered it perfectly is because talking to IT 5 years ago is different from talking to IT now. And the fact that I asked you an IT question of what's the biggest challenge you're facing in your role, and it's talking about the business at large, one, it speaks to your role position, right? But even then, I've heard CIOs or directors of IT just go, yeah, I just support whatever the executives say and that the team does that. Here you go, oh no, the biggest challenge that I'm facing in my role is, or that IT directors facing the role is that they need to understand what the strategic drivers are. And so it's less about the tech, even though it is still about the tech for you, but it's about how does tech support a bigger mission. And it's cool to be able to say that that's what IT does now, is we support a bigger mission, not just support an infrastructure to make things work. It's we need these things for the company to succeed. And I think that's it's a cool shift for sure.
Me too. I mean, for the longest time, we were considered just a cost, right? The cost of doing business. You have to have IT, and we're order takers. And they would say, do this, and we would do it, and we would do it, and we would do it. And then eventually we might say, whoa, that's too much, right? And that's about it. And that's not driving any benefit to the company. And that's why so many things got offshored, so many things got outsourced. That's a big reason, because IT wasn't bringing any benefit. So yeah, my goal is to be there making suggestions, understanding all the departments. I mean, like I said, I'm new at the place where I'm an IT director, and I got to kind of set what my goals for 30, 60, 90 days were. One of them was to get to know every vice president of the company and to set myself up so that they're comfortable coming to me. Right? That is literally one of the goals I wrote down, right? So if they're like, hey, I have a problem, I'm not sure how we can support this, next year when we grow to a certain level, I want them to come to me and be like, hey, we've got this problem. Is there a technical solution?
Yeah. No, and I think this is awesome because it's the narrative going around lately, but tech IT people need to learn how to have a seat at that table, right? It's not just about doing the tech. It's I feel like being that director IT role is a very unique combination. Like you said at the beginning of this podcast, where it's not just about tech and it's not just about people, but it's that unique thing that doesn't get explored enough. Well, it is now, but not before. How to translate tech into business, and then how to translate the business back into tech so that you become a translator almost between the tech and what is needed. And I think there's something really interesting about that. Also because, IT priorities is always a funny thing when we talk about how do you prioritize IT initiatives, especially because resources are limited. I think studies show that IT gets 4% of the revenue every single year, right? It's not a significant part of the budget. But if you're aligned with strategic drivers, then it's almost a non-issue. I'm not saying it is a non-issue, almost a non-issue in the sense that, well, we do what we can to support those specific strategic initiatives, and the business supports us because they know that we're aligned with them. So it's no longer we wish we had more resources, but we know that what we're doing works and is aligned with the business. So we're fine.
You nailed it. That's how I frame the argument. I mean, obviously there's some intangibles, right? Security, things like that I have to do, or if I have some infrastructure, I might have to replace some servers, whatever. But I just say, okay, we know this has to happen, whatever my piece is. And then I say, well, if you really want that website redesign to happen, we're going to need a little extra money. And I'll let that owner of that project go advocate for it. But at least, they have some framework. They can say, these are the strategic drivers it aligns with. And then if it aligns with none, it's also a lot easier for me to say no, because the business has already said no. They've already said, hey, this isn't not important to us. It's not a strategic driver. Sorry.
Yeah. So then that's not a project you have to do. So resources aren't limited because these projects aren't even in consideration because you can't do them. So it's and
at the place we did it where it was really robust. What we did was we actually had a couple of templates. We were on Microsoft Project Server. We built out a couple of project templates, and anything that looked like it might get done, we would actually we would go through the various teams and sort of build it out. Like, how many hours of a network resource would it take? How many hours of a data center engineer? How many hours of developers, et cetera? Because that way, if the company decided they really wanted to do it, we could say, well, we have this, but network team is tied up for the rest of the year. So if you want to bring in outside network help at, whatever, $50 an hour or whatever, this project has 100 hours of it, fund that extra part, you can do the project. So maybe even those decisions around the kind of borderline cases where maybe we could kind of do it, but we needed a particular extra resource or two. Conversation was already kind of baked in.
But it's easier to kind of advocate for more resources when the whole company is structured around strategic initiatives, right? Like you said. So I think
then my work is aligned with what the company wants. It's not what I want to do. It's what the company said we should do.
And I assume, like, if you are in those conversations, what the company wants to do is what you want to do because you had your say and you gave your advice. So then it's like full alignment. So then you know what you're doing is effective. And then obviously it's not perfect. And I don't want to be like, this is easier said than done. But I feel like that's an ideal to kind of shoot for.
Yeah, nothing's perfect, but it allows you to point to the system and not and take it away from being a conversation between people.
Yeah.
Like, I like this BP and not that one or something. It's like, this is how it ranked out. These are the scores. We added up how important yours is, and not as important as that one. Sorry.
Yeah.
I want to do it, but the system says no.
Yeah, exactly. You can. It's almost now. It's like now we're now we're minimizing it to a scapegoat. Now we're like, it's the system's fault now. I'm curious because you've only been there for a few months now, and but you do sound like throughout your history you've done a lot of successful things and worked for a lot of successful companies. So I'm curious. I'd like you to kind of talk about maybe a notable IT project that you've worked on in the past that was successful, that contributed to the organization, something that you're proud of. I kind of want you to just talk about it for a bit.
Yeah. I could think of a few, right? I've been doing it for a long time. There's one that was just so big. I think I got to go with the big one. And that is, since I already mentioned, Cardinal Health, right? Giant company, one of the biggest companies in the world. I was in a division of that spun off as its own company, became CareFusion. So as we're spinning off this company, so I don't remember exactly how big Cardinal was then, $90 or $100 billion company, gigantic company. We're spinning off a $3.5 billion business. So just outside the Fortune 500, back in that area around 2007, 2008. So it's nearly a Fortune 500 company that's just being carved out of this giant company. and most of the company was at, the corporate Cardinal offices and such. But I was kind of one of the few people, in management levels of IT, going with this new company. So we had to build an entirely brand new, nearly Fortune 500 level company from nothing. So we had to source data centers. We had offices in 30 countries. We had to build a brand new network for all of it. New AD, all the computers, like main data center. I remember we bought 26 blade chassis and hundreds of blades. I mean, huge from the ground up, totally greenfield. It was for an IT guy like who likes hardware and setting stuff up, just absolute dream, because everything that was old got to remain at the old company, right? So they had to, deal with old NT systems that were years beyond retirement or whatever, whatever might be left in some office, small office closet somewhere or something. We had all brand new everything. And the challenges around that are pretty immense when you realize, especially, we're dealing with like medical products and things. So there's a lot of regulation around it. Not just the usual, stocks and things like that, but like we had FDA regulations. So my favorite story, about the whole thing, right? A lot of it was immense challenges. I was actually thinking about writing a book about it. But I wound up switching to, leaving to go to another company when we were about 90% done. We're just kind of finishing touches. So it didn't really, my notes weren't complete enough to make the book, but to build an AD for a $3.5 billion company, worldwide, that's pretty unheard of, right? This split off from such a big company. But my favorite part is we had to separate our SAP from, take a portion of SAP out of one of the world's biggest companies, SAP. That is an incredibly complex thing. Fortunately, we had a team of people focused specifically on SAP. We brought in outside experts, and their job was to synchronize between the corporate headquarters in Dublin, Ohio, and our data center. And it spent months. And when they were at the end, they ran some checksums and found just a couple of bits difference. But we're manufacturing medical devices, some which even, go into the human body, all sorts of things that are like life or death issues. We can't have even a single that nothing can be changed, right? We can't go to the FDA and go, it's mostly the same. We were like, what do we do? Like, We hired the best experts we could find. Money was no objects, right? We were going to do this and we are going to do it perfectly. So what we wound up doing was, this was all on a NetApp back then. We mirrored it back in the headquarters, and I went back to Dublin, Ohio, not by Dublin. Went back to Dublin, Ohio, and we took a physical NetApp out. We had rented a limousine because in Chicago area, everything is limousines for whatever reason. So we rented a limo for the storage device. And the two engineers, it was absolute chain of custody. They could not be away from it at any time. Took it to Ohio State. Ohio State has its own private airfield. So there was a plane waiting for us. We'd only negotiated like a 12-hour outage window. Normally the SP is 24/7, absolutely no downtime. So we have like 12 hours. Limo takes it to the private airfield. We put it in an airplane with the two engineers, fly it to where our data center is, and then they haul it to the data center, mount it. Meanwhile, there's a second clone of it that me and another engineer have put in a truck, and we're going to drive it. And we have to, again, stay with it at all times. Like, we can't both go into a gas station. Someone has to be physically present at all times, monitoring it, watching it. It's the crown jewels portion of a multi-billion-dollar company. But we only got about an hour down the road when we got the confirmation that the one that flew there had been mounted and turned on. And it ran all of its error checks and everything. Everything was great. So I love how the solution, when all the technical things didn't work, was like super, brute force. Drive it in a car, in a plane. Yeah.
With high security, through a limousine, private plane. This comes straight out of a movie, like we're transferring the greatest secret of all time, like the Declaration of Independence. And it's
exactly what it was like. I have pictures. It was just a joke, but they have the handles on it. So I handcuffed one of my guys to it. Just to take it. He was like, trust me, we understand chain of custody. It's not going to be out of their sight.
That's hilarious. That's a really good story, actually. I love that. You should still write a book. I think you should.
I wanted to. I had a lot of notes around somewhere, but I wanted to see that project through to the end.
Yeah.
And, it was a great project near the end, though, because we had to stand up everything. Brand new company. So we had to say, like, okay, we want to create an architecture review board. Let's do it. Let's document. Let's write all our processes and all our ITSM processes. And actually, very, very early days, we were one of the first customers of ServiceNow. We started to go out of ServiceNow instance. All these things is everything from scratch, right? Just everything brand new, but at a really huge scale, right? We're a global company. So it was a really neat project. But there was another company, this one I mentioned, that owned the schools, and they had gone from, I don't remember, it was crazy, like 60 million to a couple $100 million in a year, like 10x growth. It was crazy. And they were looking for someone that had experience building out process, documenting new procedures and things. And I got just a call out of the blue from their recruiting that said, like, hey, we mentioned we were looking for this kind of role. And multiple of our vendors all said, oh, you should call this guy Mitch. He kind of just did that over at Fusion. And it turned out to be a great environment. So I left, didn't get to see the very, very tail end of the project, but it was pretty much all in place by the time I left. It's not enough to write a book.
Yeah, maybe 90% of a book, and then you just let it sit forever. You obviously, we go back to this, but you just moved into a new company recently, 3 months. You said, when you spend a certain time at any company, you get used to you get used to it. You know what the needs are, the problems are, and you solve it. What is it like transitioning into a brand new position with brand new needs and a different industry? I don't think I actually talk about that enough with certain guests. And so I kind of wanted to pick your brain about that, of like, what is it like to do it all over again and figure all these out? And what's that ramp period like? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, early in my career, I was a consultant. So I was jumping into a lot of places and having to figure things out pretty fast. So I'm pretty comfortable going into a new environment. For me, I'm much more interested in the people. So it's getting to know who is the one that I can ask something and then just expect them to tell me it's done, whether it's a day or a month later. Who are the people that I need to manage? Who are the people that if I give them something that they don't know how to do, they're going to thank me and be like, oh, you get to be the one that learns how to do that, versus the people that are going to just kind of bury that, delay and maybe get around to kind of doing it half-heartedly. So it's more around learning the people, learning the technology. The only thing that really from a technical standpoint, and the other part of people, I guess, go back to people for a second, is right. Going back to that goal of meeting all the vice presidents and stuff, learning what are their objectives, right? And what's how risk averse are they, right? Do we want to absolutely be secure, or do we want to give, say, developers a little more leeway at a particular company, that kind of thing? So it's understanding kind of what's the tone of the company. And then the one thing you have to do is you have to understand the industry. The last place I was working, for example, pharmaceutical manufacturing, you can't work in IT in a sort of FDA regulated environment and not understand the regulations around that, right? Can be literally life or death, either for your customers or for your company if you're not following those regulations. And the same thing in banking industry and defense and schools. When I was in school, we had one called FERPA. So you need to understand the non-negotiables, right? Usually the regulations and such. That's one thing you have to do for sure. But for me, beyond those and kind of just learning the tone of the company, it's learning the tone and the style of the people that work around me. How do I motivate them? Who's going to be interested in the work that I want to ask them to do?
I think you mentioned this offline, but you just finished school, correct? PhD?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Not just anymore so much, 2017, but I got my doctorate. But it does touch, I'm glad you mentioned, because it does really touch on maybe my interest in people.
Yeah.
I started earlier on in IT, right? Had a lot of technical certifications, Novell CAD, Citrix CCA, been an MCSE since NT4. But after a while, you kind of lose interest in renewing the technical stuff. And really what interested me was what motivates the people. So, after kind of splitting the difference with my bachelor's is in math, but I studied computers. UCLA didn't have specialization, or they have specializations, not minors. So my specialization was in computers. When it came time for a master's, I knew I wanted to work in management, but I was too much of a coward to get an MBA. I took the more technical route, right, and got a master's in IT. But when it was time to study for a doctorate, I really knew at that point, I just want to lead people and understand what motivates people, how to make them happier in their environment, how to give them what they need to be successful. So my doctorate is in organizational development and leadership.
I figured. I was like, the way you're talking, and I know you went to school, and I know we're talking about IT, but I feel like at some point you did not get a degree in something related to IT, and you did it related.
Yeah, I know the tech stuff's too hard.
Well, to close, and I just want to say, and I'll say this at the end, but I really appreciate this conversation. I said this offline, but it's really refreshing to talk to you for sure. I think your doctorate shows, but I think more importantly, just the way you communicate is very clear, very earnest, and I feel like you do care about people. But the final, to close, I guess, throughout your career, what are some of the most important lessons that you've learned?
You know what? I'm going to share one. This is a homework assignment for anyone watching this. It's a shout out, I guess, to Gallup, the people who do the survey polls. They do a survey that's called the Gallup Q12. The questions aren't secret. You can find them posted online. Anyone out there especially who manages people, should go look up those Q12 and memorize 2 or 3 of them. Their statements, such like, in the past week, I've received praise at work, or I know what's expected of me. And for people that are leading others, know a few of those and try to live them, as long as you do it earnestly, right? It's not something you can do disingenuously, but if you genuinely thank people, in IT especially, this is something that drives me crazy. In IT, we tend to thank people when they do something huge. So it's like you wait 18 months till a project ends, and then like, hey, here's a cake and balloons. But you know what? Somebody turns in some code. Good job. Hey, I see you've been on time for 20 days in a row. Good job. 5 days in a row, right? It costs nothing to say thank you. And it really motivates people. It makes it a better working environment. People are happy. So, homework assignment for anybody is just Google Q12, and learn a couple of those. I really like try to live by those.
Yeah. Okay. I wrote that down. That's something I'm going to do. That's my homework assignment.
All right.
Well, Mitch, thank you so much for your time today. Great conversation. Really cool to hear about what it's like to start your own business accidentally, and also really cool to hear about what it's like to grow as a Fortune 500 company in the other direction, getting pulled from an even bigger one, and then hearing a crazy, it almost sounds like a heist story if you wanted to word it like that.
Yeah.
So thank you for your time, and I wish you well.
Oh, thank you. I really had a great time today. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, me too. All right, take care.
We hope you enjoyed this Keeping IT Real episode, and thank you for listening. Make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. This podcast is all about celebrating and connecting professional heroes who work hard at IT every day. To continue the conversation and learn how VCOM can help you better buy, manage, and pay for your technology, visit us at vcomsolutions.com. Until next time.